Welcome to the Revolution Church podcast.
Hello, everybody. Good morning, good morning, good morning. How's it going? Good morning, good morning. I literally have been working on this talk up until this second, and I still don't feel 100% comfortable with it, but I'm going to give it to you, and then maybe we'll do another one.
Revisited.
Is that Kate? I can't even read anymore because I'm so old.
Yeah, Kate says
Hi,
hi.
Kate. Kate from the UK.
Steve says hi.
I'm ready for you guys to open up the UK because I want to come to the UK very badly, specifically Belfast, but I'd also like to go to London and visit Barry and Kate. Kate gave me a book. Barry never gave me a book. I had to buy Barry's own damn book. Thanks a lot, Barry. I didn't even get the free sticker that he was sending out.
What?
Nope.
Did you ask for it?
No.
Well.
He should have known better. I posted pictures of it, though. He did tell me he would give me a pen, and he never sent me that pen.
What?
Yeah. All right, everybody. Good morning.
You could send him a passive-aggressive gift of your book.
Here we are. I bought him a really nice mug with a skull on it. Good morning, everybody. Good to see you. It's Sunday all day. I'll tell you what, as I say every week, toddlers take it out of you. They make you tired. I've done a lot of hard work in my life. I have met with some of the weirdest Christians and pastors and preachers, trying to convince them to think differently. And that still was easier than dealing with my toddlers. I know that I probably missed a great joke opportunity there, but yeah, kids drive me tired, make me tired, drive me tired.
Drive me tired.
So I'm exhausted, but I've tried to understand a little Hegel for y'all this morning, but just a tiny bit, not very much at all. I'm sure Pete will critique it if he watches this, so hopefully he does. Hopefully he does. Please watch this, Pete. Reverse psychology always works on him. But yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. So this morning, Sunday morning, I woke up and I'm addicted to social media because it's actually made to be addicted to. And of course, I saw there was a Johnny Rotten, or John Lydon, as I prefer to call him, article in the Morning Times, which is actually in London, but I read all my stuff comes from the UK. No, so I actually couldn't read the full article because I didn't sign up for it, but I've read articles about this before, but about John Lydon and how he's been taking care of his wife who has Alzheimer's, and what he's going through. But it was cool this morning because when the article came up, I saw a lot of people writing nice things about him. But the last time I read an article about him that shared the same thing, a lot of people don't know a lot about John Lydon, his personal life. But he also took care of his wife's grandkids for about 7 years and took off from his career and just was a dad to them. But it's funny, like, this is the part of, like, I love punk rock, but this is the part I don't like about it, is he wore a Make America Great Again shirt. And everybody got really pissed off. And I think he liked Trump. And so everybody got really angry and was like, F him, he's a fake punk, he's not a real punk. I mean, we're only talking about the lead singer of the Sex Pistols. So yeah, I'm sure.
No accreditation there.
Yeah, and I was just amazed by the fact that here's a man and his wife is who could afford to have his wife put in a hospital, but he refuses to do that. Spends all this time, being the primary caretaker of his wife. Raises his wife's grandkids as his own. Does all these wonderful things, and this is the majority of what all this stuff is about. And punk rockers even were willing to disown him because he liked Donald Trump. And if you know John Lydon, you probably know that he doesn't necessarily like Donald Trump for the reasons that most people would. He is kind of a working class lad and grew up working class. I think his father actually grew up in Belfast, if I'm correct. But, so, working class makes sense. But he also does it because he likes to piss with people, and he likes to live his own life, and he likes to do things that are contrary to other people's belief systems and push us as well. So no one knows what he is. Was it art? Was it real? Was it this? Who knows? But the fact is, the only thing people wanted to focus on was this damn shirt that was taken of him having a cigarette break out of his window with the Make America Great Again shirt. And I think he one time wore it somewhere else too.
Out his own window?
Yeah.
It was on his own property?
Yeah. Yeah. But I think he also wore it out, but
okay.
I don't remember. I don't remember all the facts, but this was the whole point, is that he was a supporter, not that he wore the shirt, but just that and I think they asked him what he thought about Trump, and he said, I don't think he's such a bad guy or something like that. But the point is the only thing these people could focus on was his political ideal. And the fact that we don't think that other politicians that we support are just as bad, like we don't, but the thing is Donald Trump's not a smart man. So he said a lot of things publicly that were not really good to say, but it's a lot of things he said publicly are what a lot of politicians think privately. And it seems like we like to have this kind of ignorance is bliss idea in politics. But I'm not trying to get into politics today. What I'm trying to get is in John Lydon. Is that people just tore him to shreds and said he's not a real punk, he's a fake, he's a poser, blah, 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 and just threw him under the bus all because of that. And I don't like living in a world where we do that to people. So that's my 2 cents. I like in a world where we celebrate someone who loves and cares about their wife so much, even as they're losing her, they spend every day with her, taking care of her. I like the fact that he doesn't really give a damn what any of us think anyway. I really do like that. Like, you can't really cancel somebody who doesn't give a shit about what you think. And I love that. I would love to be that way someday. Just doesn't care. It's great. But, or focus on the fact of how good he was to his grandkids and everything that he's brought us, or his love for art and the way he does art. I was watching this documentary called The Public Image is Rotten, and he had this falling out with a guitarist who tried to steal all this money from him and all this stuff. And they're talking about it, and they're like, aren't you angry? Aren't you upset? And he's like, of course I am, but what's important is what's right here. And he points to the record. He's like, this was such a good piece of art that we made together. He's like, and that's all that's important. And that's what's right here, is this moment. This moment that we share together is right here. And he was talking about the beauty of that moment being more important than their falling out, more important than, all this other stuff. And I thought, wow, how beautiful is that if we all focused on moments like that, where we said, we're not friends anymore, but we had a beautiful moment together. It's like when you go through divorce, if you're just like, oh yeah, we don't get along anymore, but we have beautiful kids and we did have some really beautiful moments. And that's what really counted, were those moments where we were in love, because that was what marriage was about, was loving. What if we focused on those type of things? And what I found is Mr. Lydon does. And that's why he's one of my heroes. So if you got a problem with that, I would recommend that you do this. And that's what John Lydon would tell you to do. But I'll also give you grace. You can have a problem. We can have a good conversation about it, actually, because I got plenty of time. But I think that's beautiful, and I think it's sad when we throw people away. And everybody was so angry. So now everybody's kind of calmed down a little bit. So everybody's like, oh, I love that man. What a saint. Everybody's talking about how awesome he was. And I was like, God, man, just like a month or two ago, you guys were like, not all of them, but a lot of you folks were just throwing him right under the bus and saying how horrible he was because of what he believed. And revolution is here to help you not think that way. And I would love to debate some people who think that way, who just write people off for those reasons. But a lot of people don't want to debate anymore. And I mean in a really friendly, kind way, not in like, let's go for each other jugular, but let's like really talk about this. Because I think a lot of people find their purpose and disagreements. And that's what we're going to kind of talk about today. Oh, you did read that article. Kate read the article. I haven't read it yet, Kate. I want to, but I have to pay for a subscription, which I might just do. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and what we're talking about today is Jesus. Everybody's favorite subject.
Heard of him.
Yeah, and he's a good guy. He was a good man. If he existed. No, I'm just kidding. I believe Jesus existed.
Bart Ehrman over here.
But some of this stuff I've really, one of these things I've been trying to understand Hegel a little bit with the help of Pete Rollins and giving me really good recommendations. And honestly, I don't even think I'm ready to speak about Hegel, but I'm going to just a little bit because there was a moment that I read about where one of my verses that I've always thought about got mentioned, and I thought, oh, I want to share this with people. And often if I share things, I can work things out as well and kind of learn as well. So we're kind of learning this together. But it's we're going to be in Matthew 5:17, and you can kind of see where my rant came from too, probably a little bit from this as well. But I do like John Lydon a lot. I do like PIL, and I do like the Sex Pistols. The article is called "God Save My Queen." So if you want to, look it up, you can find it somewhere. We're going to be talking about a lot of different stuff. We're going to be talking about Matthew 5:17 today, and what that means. But first, I think we're going to have to talk about dialectic. What is the dialectic? What is the dialectic? And so I wrote down two different kind of two different meanings that I liked that made more sense to me. One was a philosophical one, and the other one was just a plain one that someone wrote that I liked. It wasn't even, I don't even think it was a plain dictionary. I just think it was something else. But anyway, most people know what dialectics are, I think, but it's good to go over. Philosophically, it is the inquiry into metaphysical contradiction and their solutions. Dialectics. One more time. Inquiry into metaphysical contradiction and their solutions. Dialectic. Two seeming conflicting things are true at the same time. So two things that seem like to have conflict are true at the same time. So we're looking at dialectic. We're thinking dialectically today. And it'll be important for this. And also one of the things I think we learned too is that Jesus might have been a little bit smarter than most of us give Jesus credit for. You ever think about that? Like, how smart was Jesus? If it was Son of God, he must have known everything, blah, blah, blah. But honestly, the way a lot of people do, I think Jesus had limits like any human being. But I think the way we often talk about Jesus is that he wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed. You know what I mean? Like, oh, he was just a common guy. You could have a beer with him, And I think that, but I also think that it seems that Jesus was a teacher and knew a little bit about philosophy and theology. And Paul definitely knew a lot about philosophy. I think Paul probably spoke to a lot of philosophers and worked amongst philosophers from my understanding. But Jesus, I think he gets kind of this kind of like, oh, our simple, loving Savior, But I don't think someone who tells parables the way Jesus told would have just been a simpleton. And I don't think someone who answers questions with questions is a simpleton. So Matthew 5, let me grab my Bible here. I need to get like a Bible stand where my Bible's like right underneath the thing. Because I feel like you guys look at the top of my hat. I'm going to sell advertising.
There you go.
And for $1 million, I'll tattoo it on the top of my bald spot. Matthew 5:17 says, "Do not think I have come to abolish the law of the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill." Now that's going to be the main thing we're focusing on. We're going to go through 17 through 20 to kind of look at the whole thing in a little bit, in a few minutes. But right now, the main focus of today is this. And so I've seen this verse used a few different ways. I think I've probably used it a few different ways. And I've had arguments with it. I also think I've had like discussions on Facebook a few years ago about it as well. And people always want to be like, well, what does fulfill mean? And what is this, And he says he did not abolish but fulfill. So what does fulfill mean? So we have to look at our way of thinking and how we go forward with that. And how conscious thinking versus unconscious and some of these things. So there's going to be a lot of stretching today. There's going to be a lot of in-depth thinking about it, and I'm only going to be scratching the surface, but 10 years from now, we'll be like, remember when Jay first tried to start talking about Hegel? Wasn't it cute? Why is this confusing? Well, it seems to fall into a contradictive way of thinking because it says not to abolish, but to fulfill. So you have abolish and then fulfill. Now, usually, so that happens. And then there's a lot of folks who use this verse as wish fulfillment in two different ways. I have definitely had neo-Calvinists use this on me quite a few times to tell me that, the law was still intact. So they can pick and choose the laws that they want to pick, which actually is if you follow the law, you can't pick and choose the law. At least that's what Paul says. But I have had neo-Calvinists who are usually very bright, very smart people, but also very angry people, and seem to be very confused on thinking that God has a different idea of what love is compared to human beings. But their wish fulfillment with this one is that it somehow allows them to hate others, but with the concept of actually they think they're loving. So anyway, they actually, in some ways, they do brag onto a dialectic, but the dialectic that does not work. Because they think, well, I'm defending God's law, and we're all horrible and filthy people, and so me hating your sin, so I love you, but I hate your sin. That kind of thing. Love the sinner, hate the sin thing. I just hate both. It makes it a lot easier. I'm just kidding.
No contradictions.
Yeah. No contradictions, complete sin. Just everybody wins, right? No, but they do that. And then there's people like me who've been like, oh, no, but fulfill. What does fulfill mean? And we use it to just be like, it's grace, man. And actually, I have to say that Hegel kind of affirms more my view of it than their view of it. But what it does is it allows us to both kind of be right in a weird, kind of strange way. But it's actually, where do we go from there? Where does it go? What does it mean? What is it saying? What is it doing? And is Christ's message alive? Is his words alive? Like, does he choose his words so they live? And Jesus wouldn't be the only one to do that, because we'd go, of course, the Bible's alive and it keeps talking. But philosophy does that too, how these guys choose their words really particularly. And so the little sentence becomes life, And that's how in Judaism, how Jewish folks were reading the Bible, is it was alive and sentences became alive. But what I like about philosophy is it takes it to the book where the words have life, but almost life even beyond the conscious, into the unconscious, and into our will, and into the reality of living life, of literally living life, and how we live it, and how it plays out in every day, and beyond just our conscious way, or beyond just a literal meaning of a word. But it goes, it's like layers of onions. It goes into the bottom few layers. It just continues to go through these layers. And so that's a really big, it's really tough. And it's why most people don't study philosophy and theology, honestly, because it does get difficult, and it does get boring, and it is a struggle. But luckily some of us find it fascinating and interesting, and try it anyway. So we look further into this, and what happens is we're going to look at this sentence again. I'm going to try to take it apart here for a second. We're going to kind of take a back view and make a different look at it. But it says, I do not think I have come to abolish the law of the prophets. I have come not to abolish it, but to fulfill it. Now, for me, Jesus takes the law to the next level, to a higher level in this. And how does Jesus move the law into a higher level at this point? But he takes the law to a higher level by saying, but to. So that but to, so we're right there when he goes, I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill. So Jesus does a little building onto it. And so what happens here next is the but to cancels the law and at the same time raises it to another level. And a way of thinking about this would be forbidden fruit. The fruit becomes more focused and thought about because it is forbidden. It's taken out of the way of thinking. It's taken out of putting it on the shelf. Let's shelf this idea for now. But all of a sudden, that idea that puts on the shelf almost becomes more important because it actually has a place of honor in a way, where it sits somewhere, and so it's somewhere. Or I think Pete always makes jokes about purity rings. There's this thing that makes you think about sex all the time and have sex, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, it's called a purity ring, because you have this ring that says, well, I'm not going to have sex. But now every time you look at this ring, you think about what it represents. And it represents this forbidden thing. So that's the concept that we're thinking about right now. Is this confusing yet? I am. So in a way, there's a negation of the law, but there's also a higher level of the law of Jesus saying, I'm not going to do it. Because he goes on to say, I'm not going to turn it over, not one word, all the prophets, And so you're like, oh, and it really, the meat lays at the end of this thought that Jesus is having. But looking at just this simplistic thing of the negation here of what's going on with, I didn't come to a lot, but to, this whole but to moment of where he's saying, I didn't abolish it, I fulfilled it. And so there is a problem here. There is, abolishment and fulfillment are two words that we can say don't they mean the same? Now, negate would be another word that you'd say, doesn't that mean, did he negate the law? Does that mean something? But here, let's look at negate and how Hegel would explain it. Negation does not annihilate something. But that's how our natural consciousness represents it to be. We think of negation as abolishing something or getting rid of it, that it's no longer there. But in a way, Hegel also talks about determinate negation, which is where that negation almost becomes a work in progress that leads to completion. But it's something that it's always there. The negation is always there. Now, I'm sorry if I'm struggling with this, because I am struggling with this, but I wanted to everything, I'm thinking about everything is not what it seems. So basically Jesus is saying, when he gets down here, and at one point he says, for I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Now, the one thing is Jesus has an issue with the Pharisees, right? Jesus is saying, if you don't take the law to its logical conclusion, if you don't take the law to its highest thing, then you will not see the kingdom of God. So what is happening here is Jesus is saying, I'm taking the law to a higher level of meaning. I'm taking it to a higher level, and I'm fulfilling it, but now it's coming to the level of grace. So by the fulfillment of this law, we're all guilty. So now what do we need? We need grace. Now what he's saying is if you don't follow the law like the Pharisees, you end up you will not enter into the kingdom of God. So we've got this huge, weird thing that's going on. So Jesus brings the law to a higher level So we are all condemned. It's not even that we're all guilty. We're all condemned. So once again, we go back to this kind of neo-Calvinist wish fulfillment, is that we're all condemned. We're all bad. But it takes it to such a point that it eventually has to negate itself and turn into grace and love. So the verse, so that ends up, so we end up with love and grace, because that's what he's saying by fulfillment. It's been fulfilled. So he's saying, I didn't abolish it, but I fulfilled it. And through this fulfillment, the law reaches its natural case of being the highest form of purity. But the fact is none of us can grasp it. So unless you're as good as these guys, and follow it this much, you're not going to enter the kingdom of God. I mean, this is a simple way of Jesus trying to stretch our mind and how we think about negation, how we think about dualistic speaking, and what is the not dualistic, but dialectical thinking, and how do we enter into a metaphysical contradiction and the solution here. And what is the solution to this metaphysical contradiction? It is grace. That this is building upon grace. And the great thing is if you look at like Abraham received the message of grace before we fulfilled the law. So Jesus says, I fulfill the law, but the fulfillment of the law is the only thing that will save us is grace. And so when he says you have to go beyond Pharisees' activities, if you're not even better than the Pharisees, what he's saying is the Pharisees don't grasp the need of grace. The Pharisees haven't taken the law to its conclusion that we're all so freaking guilty, that the law has condemned us all, that if we don't find grace, if you don't find love, if you don't find this, I heard Pete once call it the you don't have tos. So if you don't fall into the you don't have tos, which is grace, means you don't have to do anything. You don't have to do anything, then you've missed it. So if you don't get into the grace, which means that you don't have to do anything, you've gone so far into law to realize now you don't have to do anything because you're accepted. I know this is confusing, but we're going to try to work it out a little bit. So we end up with love and grace, which leads us to the fall into the you have to do nothings. Because the law is now obsolete to the you do nothings. Now you go, how is that? Well, because grace also does something with us and with our conscious and unconscious as well, is that this freedom with love and grace, because there's something within that, it's still this freedom that's coming from something greater than ourselves. It's that accepting you're accepted comes in and transforms us, even though we don't have to do anything. It's like AA. You go in and all you got to do is have the desire to stop drinking. You don't have to stop drinking. You just have to have the desire to stop drinking. And a lot of people don't stop drinking, but there are a lot of people who stop drinking. And there's a lot of people where you learn to work the thing and you learn to work the program and you learn to fulfill into this thing and you start doing things. And the next thing you know, you're starting to make coffee and you're starting to bring in sponsors and have sponsors and sponsorees and do the work and do all this stuff. And so all of a sudden you start to kind of like, oh, now I'm doing something. So grace is something that's extremely transformative, but you never accept grace with the idea that you're going to be transformed. That's just not part of it. Tillich talks about it. It goes, you don't want anything. You don't need to desire anything. You don't have to believe anything. You don't have to accept anything differently. It just is. Grace just is. And so we have to allow grace to be grace. We have to allow this pure acceptance to be pure acceptance. And so we have to realize that the law has not been abolished, but it's been fulfilled, and none of us can do that. Only Christ can say that. Only Christ can say the law was fulfilled. Matter of fact, if you want to follow it, let's read the whole thing, and let's kind of dissect it a little bit. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law of the prophets. I have come not to abolish it, and here's that, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of the letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Now, we can also be looking at accomplishment as Christ fulfilling through his death. But also, we'll talk about that later. Pass from this earth as all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called the least of these in the kingdom of heaven. That's pretty big, right? But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of all the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. That's really confusing. And you can understand why so many different theologies have been put around these few verses, and why people argue about it, and why people come up with a similar understanding. But Christ is by fulfilling the law has lifted it to the higher level. It's been fulfilled. I'm not turning it, blah, blah, blah. Don't teach other people to disobey it. Don't do any of this stuff. If you don't do this. But what he's saying is that we have to, through the denial of the law, through this fulfillment of the law, we're forced to grace. We are forced into pure acceptance, and we're forced to live into this dialectic way of thinking. I know this is so confusing. I don't feel like I'm doing it justice yet. So I'm going to use an example that a commentary on Hegel uses, where he says, one of these examples, let's see where they did it. An ordinary language, whose waywords Hegel loves, seems to capture sublation in a naysaying moment like the following. Last night the music was beautiful. No, it was sublime. Now this is what the commentary says. He says, the no here both cancels the previous statement and lifts it to the higher level.
Yeah.
So that's what's happening with the buts too, is the no thing, is that it cancels the previous statement and lifts it to a higher level. So no, the music wasn't good, it was great. Like my son will be like, hey Dad, I don't like the pasta you made tonight. And I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. And he's like, no Dad, I love it. He loves doing that. He always does stuff like that. Yeah. I don't like it, but I love it. He thinks that's the funniest thing ever. But what he loves about it is that dialectic in there that he's saying, I'm canceling out what I just said and even making, I'm making it something better. And so what we have here is Paul. Sorry, I got Paul in the brain. Jesus, Matthew, whoever. Matthew quoting Jesus. Sorry, my Bible, I don't know what I did with it. Oh, I just closed it and put it away. So in a way we have Jesus doing the same thing here. Is saying, I've taken it to another level. I've taken the law to another level. And so we have something that seems to be, in a way that we're looking for something to be annihilated. And I think what Jesus is saying is you can't get rid of, you can't negate the law. You can't say it's not there, but you have to negate it at the same time. Because only by negating it are you able to lift it up to a higher place. And to that higher place is that we want to bring it to, from saying, last night the music was beautiful. No, it was sublime. So the only way from getting to sublime to beautiful is by getting it to fulfillment. From I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill. It's the only way to get it to the next level. Is the only way to get the law to grace and love. Wow. And which is the fulfillment of law, because we had it before that. Because grace in the prophets and Abraham had the promise of grace before the 450 years before the law was even given. So you have this type of fulfillment that happens in this existence. And so the proof is in that last sentence, again, where Jesus says, for I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. And righteousness, right living, right this. So he's saying not if you fulfill everything of the law, because you have to go higher than that, unless he says, for I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds. So in order to exceed the righteousness of these people who are doing and saying everything right, to exceed that, you must accept the fact that you are accepted for not doing anything that is right, and for loving others, and for grace. You have to accept grace. You have to go to the point where it does not exist yet insists and goes on to a higher level. And I mean, it's mind-boggling to think about because I know it's just not our human way of thinking about it because we want this, either it's gone or it's there, rather than it's literally been transformed and has been fulfilled in a way that we can't grasp. That it has literally been fulfilled in a way that negates itself, but which hires itself to a point of grace and love and pure acceptance. So I know that seems like a stretch, and I know it seems like a bunch of flips and flops, but I believe it's onto something. I believe Hegel's onto something, and I do believe Hegel's confusing. And honestly, I wish I had a little bit more on this. And I think we'll ask Pete to come soon, and maybe he can even help us with this a little bit. So we looked at it as a way of forbidden fruit. We've looked at it as the cancellation that makes and grabs. So what did I put here? I hate when I can't read my own writing because I have dyslexia. Forbes and expresses better. Sorry, I'm reading all my notes. Oh, I was thinking about what Bono said. Yeah, the lead singer of U2. He says, love is a higher law. You know, and then in the next line in this song, he goes, you ask me to enter, but then you make me fall. I can't be holding on to what you've got when all you got is hurt. Now, that's another way of looking at it. He's going, love is a higher law. You ask me to enter, but then your law that's not high enough makes me fall because you can't get to the highest form of that law, which is love and grace, which is pure acceptance, you know, which is the whole point of why people do the law, is to please God, to sacrifice to God, to show themselves worthy of God. And he's saying, this is it. The fulfillment is love and grace. You are worthy. You are accepted. All these things are fulfilled and done. The law is complete. This new law just says it's done, it's taken care of, it is finished kind of vibe through that at the same time existing. So there is a new law, and the new law is love God with all your heart and your neighbor as yourself. It's not a new law, it's an old law, because when Jesus is asked about, well, what are the two most important commandments? And he says, love God with all your heart. Equally important is love your neighbor as yourself. When Jesus was at the Last Supper, he says, I want to give you guys a new commandment. So here is this commandment type of law. Jesus says, I want you guys to love each other, really love each other. By your love for one another, the world will know that you belong to me. So this is what we're seeing is a complete dialectic shift happening that is hard for us to grasp. So when we talk about dialectics, it's not easy to accept. When I went into dialectic behavioral therapy, the type of therapy that I've taken that has revolutionized my life, and I remember they started talking about where two opposites can be true. And it was really hard for me to understand and grasp, and it's still hard to struggle with. But this is why you start to get into the depth of philosophy and things like this when you start looking at dialectics, because it's so rich, it's so layered, it deals so much with things that are just beyond our just normal everyday conscious thinking. It goes so beyond our dialectic thinking, our dualistic thinking goes so beyond our dualistic thinking, our very, firm black and white thinking of it's this or it's that, legalistic ways of thinking, this. It goes beyond that. And you live within a tension that becomes really beautiful, but is really hard to express on Facebook or on Twitter or in a sermon or in a talk. And it's really tough. That's why people go to school to do this. This is why I'm reading a book about Hegel that's not written by Hegel. It's written by somebody else telling me about what Hegel says, because I can't understand Hegel on my own. I barely can understand this. I had to call Pete this morning and have a conversation, and I'm still struggling with this idea of this negation, of this dualistic, or this, what is the word we were talking about?
Dialectic?
Not dialectic, determinate negation,
Oh, yeah.
That determinate negation says it's a work in progress that leads to completion. So it's this constant, and eventually it's completed. So but what's great is Jesus teaches if you go through Jesus's teaching, it backs up what I'm trying to tell you in a much better way than I could try to tell you right now. But what I'm trying to say, this fulfillment of the law, which is lifting it to a higher level, which actually denies it, but at the same time makes it into grace and love. Jesus' life and teachings all support this work and takes us to this next level. So I guess my point is there's a lot of way of dialectic thinking in the Bible and expressions. And to remember that, because I think it's important for us to realize the contradictions that also lay within the Bible, which the Bible has a lot of contradictions, some that aren't able to work out with each other, but it also has some that work very well with each other. But it requires time and studying and getting in there. Our church is different than other churches. I was reading this somebody the other day who put this tweet out that was like, talking about how sometimes people be like, if your pastor doesn't talk about this on Sunday, you need to find a new church. And then the person's way of solving that issue was, well, if the whole congregation worked together on the talk, then that would solve that issue. But for some of us, like with Revolution, for me, I'm trying to read these impossible books so you don't have to, and bring some of this stuff there. I work through it with some of you by talking, and we have great conversations. But sometimes that's not how it works. I mean, every church works differently, but for us, it's like, I wouldn't do that with the surgeon. I wouldn't be like, can we just all talk to the surgeon and maybe the surgeon will take our advice? I'm not saying I'm a surgeon, but what I'm trying to say is this idea that, we all have to work on these complicated ideas, and that's what I'm trying to do, is work really hard to bring those to you, and I'm reading a comment right now from Steve Peters that says, some believe that God exists in the contradictions. And I believe that too. I believe that's true, and I have to live with that, and it makes me very uncomfortable to live in that way. Because I think once we start to get to the dualistic thinking, the black and white thinking, we often want to just always err on the side of law, err on the side of sacrifice, rather than trusting something that says, it's done, it's fulfilled, just don't drink today, just accept yourself today. Just live in the moment. Because in that moment you will change, because grace becomes extremely personal at that moment. And I know that there's a lot of people who push back from personal salvation and things like that because they don't like it and they think it's all egocentric. But for me, it is an individual work that's happening within each one of us, of this kind of accepting you're accepted and this transformation that happens over time. I'll be honest with you, when I got sober to go to AA, when I got sober, the only reason I was able to get sober was because I got the concept of grace. And the concept is God didn't care if I was drunk or not. I could be drunk for the rest of my life. It just didn't matter to God. God loved me, period. That was done. How I thought about God was wrong. Because all the time I thought I have to get sober to make God happy, to be a good Christian, to do all this. And as soon as I lost that idea, I had been to AA before and said, there's no way, I'm not really an alcoholic, I'm not going to do this is ridiculous. But as soon as the stigma came off of it, as soon as the rules and regulations came off of it, what's the word? What's the word I'm looking for? Remember when they outlawed drinking?
Prohibition.
Yeah, as soon as the prohibition came off of alcohol, ironically, for me, is when it wasn't as exciting anymore.
It's not fetishized anymore.
Yeah, it's not fetishized. It wasn't special. It wasn't even on the shelf anymore. It was just in my hand. There it was. And I realized, I want to quit. As soon as I understood grace, the Bible became alive to me. I wanted to study it and understand it because it wasn't the idea of that I'm doing this to make God happy. I'm doing this to win some sort of heavenly approval,
To fulfill the law.
Or to make anybody else happy, and that's probably what I would struggle with more in my own life is like, I want to make other people happy so they listen to my work and so I can do this and I can dream this and have this, blah, 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 and then pay my bills and take care of my kids. And There's still those desires to want to be liked, but with God, I don't worry about that anymore. I don't even know what God is anymore. But through all that comes a radical change, where all of a sudden now I desire to read Hegel. Now I desire to read the Bible even deeper. I don't want to let the Bible go, even though at this point maybe I could, because I want to be there, because there's something about that message of grace that keeps me there. There's something about that message of saying, of worrying about the victim and also the victimizer, and saying, I can love both of these people. This is the dialectic that I live in, that I don't have to choose between one of them. I can say, I don't like what this person did, but I still feel there needs to be grace. And I hate what happened to this person, and of course there's grace there. And I can live within that tension and not choose it, not have to make a choice anymore. Because I live within this concept of grace that continues to throw dialectic things into my head that says you've got to choose one or the other. And the world continues to try to put these opposites within us, these contradictions that with grace says they're no longer contradictions, they're dialectic, that they work together. What everybody else is saying is a contradiction doesn't have to be a contradiction anymore. Yeah. And it lifts us to a higher place of community. It lifts us to a higher place. I mean, when Paul was saying there's neither Jew nor Gentile, slave nor free, what he was saying is there's no longer these contradictions. There's no longer these laws. There's no longer these levels that you all have set up to separate you guys. This isn't here anymore. You've created it. But with grace, this isn't here anymore. Grace does something that brings us together as a community, and that takes away even your identity. That would before separate you. And so that's the intricate workings of this religion we call Christianity that's really tough to work through. And that's why I say, like, that was my point with the whole thing of, like, we should all get together and plan the sermon. But honestly, I wouldn't be thinking like this unless I had to study and read and get to where I am right now. I'm not saying I'm better than anybody. I'm just saying I'm just good at my job. You know what I mean? Like a mechanic or something like that. Like, we have to think about these things and go in depth, think about these things. And the problem is with like fundamentalism, we have a lot of people who think at a very basic mode of Christianity or a very basic mode of faith that says, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to dress like this, you got to think like this. But they're not willing to peel back the layers of the onions and spend the extra time. That's why a lot of people give up faith, is because they don't want to look deeper into it. And I get that. They don't want to live within something that has a dialectic within it. They don't want to live with something that they have to sit into a contradiction with, And they're told their whole life that there are no contradictions to it by someone who did not go deep enough to realize that it's all about the contradiction in the dialectic that takes us deeper and takes us to the place where there's neither female or male nor female, Jew nor Gentile, free or slave or free. All these people, they don't want to go to those deeper levels, and we have to work hard to go to those deeper levels. And that's why we build community. I think that's why we have communities. That's why we have churches. That's why we have people who study. That's why we have philosophers and teachers and people like that to take us to dissect these things, to look at them so we can all work together to get to another level, if that makes any sense. So I think we have to realize that, some churches work this way. This is the church. Revolution is working in a way where I'm doing everything I can to understand these difficult things. One, so you'll want to, not so you don't have to. That's not it. So you want to, and so you'll also get on here and then be like, well, Jay, actually, I did, I feel like my dad, my whole life, told me to read the Bible and study the Bible, and then I really started to do it. Then I found out this stuff, and he was like, I don't know if I like exactly what you're talking about. And I'm like, well, I got it because you told me to do that. I just guess went maybe deeper than I was supposed to.
Give me that Bible.
Yeah, let's just put that Bible up on the shelf for a little while. But see what I'm saying? And so, even my father is dealing with a limited understanding of the Bible, and that's what we don't understand with a lot of these pastors and preachers that we have a hard time with, is that they're maybe reached their limits. And so for us, why do we study the Bible? Why do we read? Why do we look into these things? Why do we mess with philosophy? It's so we can have these hard, tough conversations, and not with the idea to win the conversation, but like the Bible talks about, is that love that leads to repentance. And all that is a love that leads to change. that draws people in, that helps people think differently, that helps people think, think about these ideas and these concepts that seem really hard to grasp and seem outside of human grasp. And they're not outside of our grasp. They just really are tough to deal with, and really tough to think about, and really tough to simplify. And so we need more of that. I really feel like there's friends of mine who I can talk to who everything they've rejected, I get what they've rejected, but I also want to say what you've rejected is a fundamental understanding of these thoughts and these ideas. And I would also reject those ideas as well, because they're so fundamental. We miss them so much. It's a 6th to 12th grade understanding of these concepts. And these concepts, in order to even want to embrace these concepts, we have to look with even deeper. And we have to look at the whole text as well, often. And see how the text, these different books and different writings, how do they interlay and how do they interwork? And what is the full message here? And also, what is, also studying the Bible, I've learned that there's forgeries in the Bible. And I was told my whole life that there was nothing like that in the Bible. So even understanding there are forgeries within the book that I will discount, and a lot of people can find and use and work through, and that's great. I discount because I realize, it's made the message even, it's a toxic that's gotten into the water. And so it's making people sick and making people think differently. And unfortunately, because they've got this simplistic understanding that everything in there has to be right and be special and be magic, they can't let that go, And so we have to have those tough conversations. Like, can we kind of have the tough conversation that maybe the Bible's not magic? That maybe the whole thing isn't really the Word of God, but that it's written by human beings, complex human beings, but it's written by humans who are wrestling with this well, and we have to wrestle with it in order to find these truths in there. And I don't think we necessarily have to do gymnastics or be acrobats to figure out what the Bible means. But I do think that it does require study. It does require understanding. It does require reading good books. I used to ask Pete all the time if he could write an intro to pyrotheology. And for years, I asked him, you should do this, blah, 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 you should do this, you do this. And then one day he was like, Jay, some of the reasons why you're starting to understand a little sliver of the pyrotheology? And I go, why? He goes, because you've read good books. I'm like, oh yeah, that's true. I've read this and this and this. And he's like, man, it's not a intro book. There's not an intro book there. You can't write an intro book. The fact is that you have to study. You have to read. You have to put the work in to get there. There's no silver bullet. There's no, idiot's guide to pyrotheology. There's no idiot's guide to understanding all the nuances of Christianity and the history of the Bible and the history of Rome and the history of the Gauls and the history of, there's just no quick way to do that. You have to be willing to sit and read, and I'll call Pete sometimes and I'm like, oh, what are you doing, man? Oh, I'm watching a lecture from this professor on philosophy about, and I'm like, put it in English, man, I don't get it. But the idea is putting in the work and taking the time to realize these things. Now, my goal is to try to put in this work and do these things and then bring it here and try to simplify it so we can kind of see the beauty of those things and that they're there and go, hey, look what I found, oh, eureka, it's there. And let's, how do we all get it? And how do we share it? So I still want to give everybody an easier path to faith and to religion. That's the goal of revolution is to communicate complicated ideas in a more simple, beautiful way. But it's not always easy, as this one was not easy at all. I don't even think I actually did it, but I tried. And I'll try again, and that's, if you don't succeed, try again. But that's what I love about this community is I love that I can come to you guys with things that I'm not 100% on, struggle with it and go through it and say, oh, this is really hard. It's not that easy. And that we look at other issues that way too, And, as I started to look at politics, and saw these issues, and I was focusing on all these different issues in politics that just drove me crazy and made me mad, and I wanted to tweet about them all. And then I started to peel the onion back, and honestly, capitalism started to see to be at a root of so many of these issues that I couldn't stand, of this trying to fulfill this lack, trying to be happy and trying to find all these things. But it started to lead me back to capitalism, And so now a lot of times I don't argue things out, because I'm like, I see the root. I see where the root is growing from. And so now I'm so much more focused on the root. So sometimes if you see me silent about something, it's not that I don't care. It's that now I'm trying to focus on that root of that problem and going like, how do we get there so that part of the bush dies, so that falls off. How do we get down to the bottom of the roots and cut the roots
instead of just the symptoms?
Yeah, then rather than the symptoms, but the symptoms are horrific. Sometimes the symptoms have become more even horrific than the very root of it, and that's the problem, is that
it's a distraction then.
Yeah. So then we are completely distracted fighting this thing that continues to just grow and rebreed and do all these things.
Yeah.
So these are deep, weird thoughts, and I hope today that some of this sat with you okay. But you know what? Let's do a little afterglow, because maybe you guys can help me clarify some of these thoughts. We've gone for an hour. We'll try to keep this quick.
We got quite a few comments here, Jim.
Oh, geez.
So
hit me with it.
This might be an ongoing conversation.
That's okay.
So
hit me with your best shot.
All right.
Fire away.
So we have a few people who are trying to kind of put into their own words. You know how there's that, I think it's a Platonic, or I think Plato or Aristotle, one of the two of them I know, had the exercise of speaking back to the speaker.
Well, that's what I need.
Put it back into their own words.
Yes, please.
So Jessica took a swing at this. You got it? Our cameraman was fainting there.
Yeah.
Passing out.
He was
Looking at all these comments. Jessica took a little swing at kind of restating one of your, I think is when you were first reading from Matthew 5:15, or was it, 15 through 17. So the first half, or the first part that you were reading. She took a little swing at it and said, fulfillment of the law can only start to happen after receiving the grace? Question mark, maybe? And then Heather took a little swing at it also and said, the fulfillment of the law is grace? Question mark?
That's how I would have seen it, and how I do still see it. Yeah, I think that would be the simplest way to put it.
Mm-hmm. Is great, yeah.
But also knowing that grace, compared to the law, becomes, at a face value, is extremely problematic.
Yeah.
But within the dialectic, it's a very beautiful thing, and within the unconscious of what it really does is even greater than, it's greater than the law. It becomes, it does that switch from beautiful to bliss. Grace takes it to the bliss level.
Right. And maybe that's a way that the law...
Not beautiful, but bliss.
Maybe that's the way that the law is so active and alive, is because you're constantly saying, no, not pretty, but beautiful.
Yeah.
No, not beautiful, but perfect. No, not perfect, but it's that constant. But rather, like you said, what was the first example that the commentary listed? Like the music was not beautiful, but
bliss.
Bliss. Yeah. So it's alive because it's constantly saying no, don't take the soldier's cloak for 1 mile, do it for 2. No, not 2, do it for 4. No, not 4, do it for 8.
Well, and the unconscious too gives us different desires as well, and takes advantage of the law, which Paul shows us in, Romans 8, I think.
Yeah. I'm gonna read one more swing at restating that first idea. Jim said, maybe the law is an experimental teacher or tool or method that leads us to a place where we can, a place that we can discover through experience, where we are in need of a new perspective.
Yeah. No, I mean, Paul said it was meant to be temporary as well, so you also have that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But then that's where you come back to like, oh, it's temporary, but then you have Jesus saying, oh, no, the law's not done. It's fulfilled.
Right.
So then we have to live in that tension.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's why it's so timeless then, right? It's because...
it's really tough.
Kind of taken outside of time. By that attribute of it. And then, looks like this is Greg here. My pop's here chiming in saying, The paradox that you have been addressing strikes me how the Apostle Paul says that the law is a tutor. It's not the end-all. It's a teacher. Thomas pointed out that living in ancient Palestine, according to the law... in ancient Palestine, living according to the law was the definition of righteousness.
Yeah.
So Jesus was showing how to get to a new definition of righteousness based on grace. That we were... that was where the law was meant to go in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's a good one. That's really good. Yeah.
And that's kind of like how Jesus is validating the Pharisees, saying, oh, these guys are onto something. If we have to fulfill all of the law, this is what it's going to look like, you know? And I think that's...
Well, context always really clarifies things as well, I think, too. And
totally,
I could
absolutely.
definitely use more context all the time. I just don't have it on the top of my head. I usually have to research again and again and again and again.
Jim said, again, he said, love God, love your neighbor, elevates our love for those around us to the level of true worship when we love on the folks with intention and obedience to this new understanding of an already fulfilled law.
Well, and you know, and to think about it too is what Jesus says is he changes the law as well in the next few sentences, I believe, because he goes, you know, you've heard it say like if an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, or if someone does you wrong, kill them, you know. And he goes, well, I say love your enemy, do good to them, do good to those who persecute you. So it is an elevation of a type of law that says this is beyond that.
Wow, yeah.
You
It's
know?
that but rather again, isn't it?
Yeah. So he goes, but rather,
Right.
and so the rather elevates
it.
to a new place. And I think that's something that
Through negation,
would be
kind of.
would actually make this talk better had I really gone through some of those. Is you've heard it said, but I say.
Yeah.
You know, when Jesus is taking the law to another level.
Right.
You know, and that's another thing is where we choose often to where people go, no, see, Jesus made it even harder, so we have to do all these things. But they're not seeing it in really the grace, in the way of grace.
Right.
They're not seeing it in the way of like, yeah, but it's completely shifted. It's completely taken the law and gone, it's completely done this weird thing with it.
Wow.
So that the fulfillment part, then all of a sudden you have to go back to that fulfillment part of like, oh, this is the fulfillment is now I can't kill my neighbor. I have to love, I can't kill my enemy. I have to love my enemy.
Yeah.
Holy shit. It has taken it higher to a higher level, but there's something else in it. And it's like, it literally does become something kind of supernatural.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So many comments responding to comments. Okay, I'm just going to read just a couple more here. And then we might have to take some of this.
Yeah, we don't have to read the comments.
No,
referring to comments because we'll just let the folks have conversation.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna read a couple more here.
But if there's anything comments to us, let's see what that is.
Yes, sir. Ray said, "I'm sick of the criticism against me that I lost my evangelical faith because I read too many books and I studied these things at too young of an age. In no other field of study would such a criticism be laid down."
Yeah, I mean, my parents were afraid of it. Even my own mother, you know, was like, be careful, you know, you could study yourself right out of Jesus, you know. And, but I also think where my mom meant from that and what she understood from that, she saw people who would come out of seminary and not believe in God anymore. But often a lot of those people who've come out of that type of teaching, they're disillusioned because everything they were taught going in and the reasons they went in weren't there anymore. And so you've been stripped of all the reasons that you originally went in, and you think, well, what I understand now isn't the same as what I've been told. And so it's once again, you know, it's you've had a reformation happen within in you, and you can't say, well, I don't see God the same way these people do, and I was told God is this way, and now I've realized that it's a complete another way. And so sometimes it's just a decision to say, I don't want to live within this complexity. I don't want to live in the tension. I don't want to live within the contradiction.
Yeah.
And I understand that, especially when you've been told your whole life there is no contradiction, and then you realize, oh, maybe all there is contradiction.
Totally. Yep. I think that is a great way to wrap it up there, Jay.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I think so.
We don't have any like hardcore, like,
well,
this was a horrible talk, or
I'd
you're
say the
bad.
hardest, the most, the strongest pushback, if you want to comment this straight up pushing back.
Yeah.
Thomas said the Bible may be magic, but it was never meant to be a science book or history book. I think that's where we go astray.
Okay.
Is with the expectations that we put on it. I think is what he's kind of saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is when we expect. When.
Well, and if it is magic, we all know magic is just illusions.
Depends on how you define magic, I suppose.
No, I mean, it's just illusions. I've never seen real magic, so prove it. Anyway, well, thanks everybody for struggling with me today and going through this. And I just want to let you know, like, this is literally the first few months of my 10-year study of Hegel. I have made a decision, to study Hegel for 10 years. So this is literally the first few months of my study. So hopefully this will be clarified as we walk down this road together over the next 10 years. Love you guys. I appreciate you all. Life is tough right now, but I just want to let you all know in this community is that this is the highlight of my week, and that this is what I live for, and this is what gives me strength and gives me encouragement and keeps me going. And your comments do, your pushback does. Just being able, I'm extremely introverted and extremely loner by myself a lot. And this time is my time of being with people and being with community, even if it's just online right now and it's just words and it's just texts. But that's what this is to me. And so I just want to say thanks for that so much. And lots of love, lots of grace. And we will see you next week. Thank you so much. Bye-bye for today.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. To make your 100% tax-deductible donation today, please visit revolutionchurch.com/donate. You can also learn more by clicking the donate section on the website.